Wanting to keep my podcast sponsorships and advertisements free, I stayed away from such options. Instead, earlier this year, an alternative appeared. With my fiancée, we have joined a rapidly growing marketing network for a company which develops technologies and healthcare products based on traditional Chinese medicine. Instead of advertising products and services, I've decided to extend this opportunity to you. While this opportunity may not be for everyone and might still be unavailable in your country, I have no doubt that in time it could be, and therefore here we are. If you are looking for a side hustle, an alternative way of earning, and a space to grow as your own boss and manager, this program could be for you. Commission-based and fully remote, I believe it to be an opportunity for those who feel like a 9-to-5 model takes away too much of their life and isn't exactly worth their time. If you'd like to learn more, follow the link below. If your country is on the list, you're in. I look forward to working with you, and now, enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to the WS podcast. My name is Wojciech Salski, I'll be your host for today. And before we begin, may I just remind you, if you find this podcast entertaining, useful, or any way, shape or form, something for you and for others, then please make sure to follow, subscribe, basically support the show. That's the best way to do it. If you'd like to share it with your friends, that's the best way to advertise. And thank you so much for being here. If you'd like to support the podcast in any other way, please follow the link below. There are options there. And to all of you who are supporting, who are listening, who are tuning in on different hours of the day to hear some pointers about books, ideas, and maybe some conversations that I'm going to have in the coming months with new people again, thank you. Simply thank you. It's great to be here. And it's great to have you here. So yeah, without further ado, I guess it's about time we start. Now, I must say, this might just be, it seems like every now and then I do say that, so I don't know. But it certainly is one of the most impactful stories, books, movies as well, trilogy that I've ever encountered. And it's, of course, the Lord of the Rings that we're going to discuss today. And do not worry, I will yet again make sure to keep basically all of the facts from the story hidden more or less from your view. So if you've not had the chance yet to either experience this cinematic milestone of Peter Jackson's trilogy in the early 2000s, or if you've not listened or read the Lord of the Rings trilogy, or maybe The Hobbit, but we're going to focus on the Lord of the Rings today, I would definitely recommend. I mean, yeah, before we start exploring the topics, I just wanted to share from my personal life experience. I think I watched the first Lord of the Rings when I was like 10, maybe 11. I was really into all kinds of historic and military and fantasy movies at the time, and it was one of the movies that my parents somehow decided to agree on me watching it, or maybe they didn't really know. I think it was on TV for the first time I watched it, and I know for a fact that for a long time I watched it with Polish lector underscoring the story, so it was also very different to what I'm experiencing right now, being fluent in English and being able to enjoy it in its original form. But that series, that trilogy, shifted my life for sure. I dove so deep into the world. I read the books. I had like 300 plus of those little Games Workshop figures, strategy games that you play on maps. I had a huge map in my house as well, in my room, that I've built with my father. And one of my biggest regrets, funnily enough, from my early youth is that I have sold these figures for next to nothing in comparison to what they were, meant for me sentimentally, and the amount of work that it took with me and my grandma to paint them all, because I wanted a computer. It was just a silly choice, and unfortunately my parents did not stop me. And I don't really have that many regrets in my life, but it's one of those things that I do regret. And so, I guess that's life. You learn, you live and you learn. I know for a fact that from now on, I will not sell anything for a piece of hardware, for a computer of that sort. There is a certain power in these things. And anyway, it was really, really impactful. And in many ways, it shaped the way I perceived, the way I wanted to act. I associated, as we do, with some of the characters, with some of the deeds that the characters in those stories act out, and basically I wanted to be like them. And I think it was very, very impactful in a positive way overall on my development as a young boy. So we will not talk about these. I think I've prepared a longer episode for you today. I'm not gonna rush it. I want to explore, I think, at least 5 different themes. So if you need to take a break and then come back to the episode halfway through, that's fine. Whatever rows your boat. Maybe you want to speed up a little bit or take it in chunks, but I feel like, especially that we're doing the whole trilogy in one, and we're not gonna dive into the storyline too much, basically almost not at all, but still there are so many things, and I think, quite frankly, you could make a trilogy of books just exploring the themes, such as the theme of courage, sacrifice, resistance against tyranny, that were basically written into these crazy and amazing fantasy stories created by Tolkien. So even out of the interesting factor of, Tolkien created his own languages for these stories. He was one of the first to ever do such a feat. He published them in 1950s, so just on the backbone of the Second World War, and many of them ring true. The whole idea still rings true today, and we'll explore that. The resistance against the all-seeing eye is one of the topics I'd like to discuss with you, as we did over the past few weeks as well. And there are just so many facets to it. I've read the trilogy twice, and once as a younger, basically an adolescent boy, and then once quite recently, 2 years ago. And the depth of these stories is just immeasurable. And of course, depending on your life struggle and your stage of life, you're gonna resonate with some of these and maybe sort of skim over the other ones. But I would urge you to read the books or listen to them. And if you don't want to, fair enough, watch the movies, because they are also an amazing piece, a cinematic piece. And they, obviously all the books always offer us a little bit more, because they allow us to imagine it ourselves, which in the movies is basically done for you. But nevertheless, if there are some stories that were made into a movie, well, I think this is one of them, and certainly I would still encourage you to explore it. With all that said, I guess let's start. So the first topic I'd like to discuss is, of course, the overarching hero's journey, right? So I don't think it's going to be much of a spoiler to explore this idea of a very ordinary, very insignificant individual, such as Frodo, who suddenly becomes the bearer of the ring, and essentially the whole of the world's future seems to suddenly hang on his shoulders. He's, you could say that he's carrying the cross, right? This idea from Christianity that you should take your cross and bear it, the invitation from the Christ, supposedly to take on the challenges of life and to try and make the life better, is certainly this the quest that Frodo is presented with. And so, you know, as we've explored in The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Campbell, you know, the episode I'll link below as well, it's a very universal story in a sense that all of us, all of the time, are challenged by some things. And even if you don't feel that your life is challenging in any ways, maybe that lack of a challenge is actually the challenge in and of itself. Because, you know, if you're not, I would argue, and of course this is just an opinion, but if you are not progressing, if you're not striving to make yourself better, to make your life better, to make other people's life better or the world better, you're essentially dying. I mean, you know, the entropy, the law of entropy, which is always around us, making the universe more and more complex and making the universe more and more chaotic, can only be fought or sort of pushed back on by our actions and deeds that are striving to bring order and striving to maybe change some of the aspects of our lives. So the invitation that Frodo is basically offered is the invitation that all of us essentially are offered at some point in our lives, at all times, I think, I would argue. So it's this idea of abandoning the comfort, the Shire, which could be also considered the Eden Garden, and, you know, risk basically his life, put his life on the line for the betterment of the world, to become the savior of the world. And this is, yet again, you know, there are so many stories. The hero story is, I guess, one of the most, if not the most popular story, most universal story of in the world, I think, for a good reason, because all of us are heroes in our own stories at all times. But this idea, you know, for example, when I was thinking about this, in particular about the stories that I know, you know, the story of King Arthur and his knights, and this idea that you need to look into the darkest space, in the darkest corner of the forest, and that part which you're scared the most is the part you should enter, because behind your greatest fears lie the greatest treasure, you know, the greatest development of yours. I think that's a very universal truth that all of us have to basically deal with on a regular basis. And if you're running away from it, that doesn't really solve your problems. You just sort of postpone the problem for the future, and the future will come. And at some point, the problem will either be too big for you to deal with, or because you've grown and because you've prepared yourself or maybe fought the problem in the meantime, you will be able to face it and challenge and win. You will be able to slay the dragon, if you will. And of course, the story of Abraham, right? So the story of invitation that he must leave the comfort of his parents' home, and he basically is invited to go out into the world and make something out of himself, to not waste his life away. So, you know, here I have a few quotes and ideas that I would like to put forth with you. So, the invitation that Frodo is offered is of course not an invitation. It's not a tentative invitation. It's not like, here is the opportunity, and if you don't want to do it, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Just we'll find someone else. There is no point at which the hero can be someone else. Of course, there are many heroes in the story, as there are many heroes in our stories as well. But since it is your particular challenge that you're facing, it is only you. That's how I'm, sort of defining it. It is only you who can challenge and who can overcome that particular, story of yours, that particular challenge. And so the quote that I want to bring up twice here is this discussion, the dialogue between Frodo and Gandalf, who's a sort of a father figure, a guide, somewhat a sage, essentially, a wise old man who offers Frodo some sort of advice and support throughout the stories. And the quote goes, "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all those who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." So of course, the challenge, this universal call to become the hero of your own story is inevitable. Basically, Gandalf makes Frodo realize that there is no other option, but since there is no other option, you should look for options within this situation. Just by turning away your gaze, you will not be able to make it go away. It's like this story about the dragon in the house. I think I've brought it up at some point. I listened to it. It's like a little funny animated story, maybe a book, that basically goes something like, there is a house and there is a family, there is a kid, and the kid sees one day a little dragon in the living room. And of course, he points to the dragon and says to his parents that there is a dragon in the room and, we should probably do something about it. And his parents are, whether willfully blind or maybe they truthfully do not see that dragon to be a problem. Maybe they don't see the dragon. And so they basically convince the kid not to think about the dragon. And so the dragon grows a little bit, and yet again the kid sort of points out that there is a dragon in the room, and by now it's so big that you cannot really enter the kitchen anymore. And so everyone seems to walk around the dragon, and the parents yet again, instead of addressing the problem, they try to sort of sweep it under the carpet, as we say. And so yet again they convince the kid to just let it go. There is no dragon. And as you can imagine, at some point, the story goes very similarly to the point where the dragon is so big that essentially the family can no longer live within the house. The dragon basically becomes the whole house. And as they stand outside, and yet again, the child basically, goes to his parents to ask for help because he cannot get into the house, and so they cannot. And only at that point do the parents decide to face the dragon, right? To address the problem, to point to the elephant in the room. And only through that can they actually overcome the problem. And so, of course, this is just an allegory. It's not that there is the real dragon in your house right now, but inevitably in each of our lives, there are problems that over time will grow if they are not addressed. If you lie, with every next lie, you're entangling yourself in a more thick web of lies. And as Mark Twain once said, those that tell the truth don't have to remember what they said. The problem with lying, of course, is that over time it becomes so complex to maintain the lies that you've weaved before that it essentially becomes impossible. And very similarly, if you have a certain problem in your life, maybe you lost a job and you're feeling a bit down and you don't feel like you can do anything about it. Unless, of course, you're at a privileged position that you don't have to have a job, maybe because you're a trust fund kid or maybe because your spouse or your parents are able to support you financially fully, at some point you will have this problem sort of grow, right? Because even if you do have some savings right now that would allow you to keep on going without a job for the next few weeks, months, years, if not addressed, the problem of not being able to make money might over time become a bigger problem of not being able to pay for your things, and then a bigger problem of not being able to live your life. And of course, this is the challenge, the downward spiral that people that fall into apathy and these low states, according to Hawkins, as we've explored in Letting Go, which I'll actually link below as well. As we've explored the map of consciousness from Letting Go, from David Hawkins's work, apathy and shame are one of the lowest states that you can be dwelling in, which both have really low energy level and also over time basically drive you to extinction and potentially to do things that essentially end your life. And so the alternative to that is, of course, to address the problem at hand, to challenge and to become the hero of the story, right? And so the quest basically forces Frodo to risk everything, because there is no other option. And the big part here, an interesting sort of twist on it that I wanted to share with you before we go to the next theme, is this idea that personal growth, if you think about it, demands of you to outgrow your previous self. So you could say that you're putting your life on the line. You're literally risking losing yourself in order to become the person you need to become. The way you are today is not the same way you were 2 years ago. It's not the same even the way you were 2 minutes ago. And so, this is one of the reasons why sometimes this personal growth journey can be a really lonely and really upsetting one, which I can definitely relate to, because essentially what you do when you decide to change is you not only challenge yourself and your sense of being the way you are to change into someone else, but also you challenge all of these concepts and ways of being that you've established with your community, with your family, with your friends, with your friendship groups, with your society. That basically, it's almost like by changing, you offer them a mirror. And of course, this can aggravate people, because as they see you change, they can become jealous or envious about your change, and they might want to, I'm not saying this is a general universal notion, but it's certainly a universal notion on the whole, that some people will try to drag you down back into the state in which you were before, because their comfort and their way of being juxtaposed with your new way of being and your new way of acting might be so painful to them that they won't want you to do so. It's yet again this idea of crabs in a bucket, that apparently if you keep crabs inside the bucket, you don't have to worry that they will get out, because the moment one of the crabs gets high enough to get out, the other crab or other crabs will pull it back. And while the crabs might not be thinking to pull it back because they are jealous, it's the same sort of mechanism we're talking about here. So you are going to grow through sacrificing your previous self and potentially also sacrificing your previous self within the community. And that's why, for example, at some point in your life, your friends from childhood might not be as relevant and as resonating with you as they were before. And, you know, we've talked about it before on a multiple different episodes. It's just the way life is, right? The way I imagine it is a sort of, you meet people or you pick up things, skills, ideas that allow you to walk a certain part of your path, but maybe at some point that path will diverge, and it's okay to go your separate way. It's, if that's something you need to do, if that's something you feel right within yourself to do, then so be it. And that's the sacrifice you might need to make. So in terms of the sacrifice that Frodo makes and other heroes in this story, one could ask, like, why? You know, what's the whole point? What's the danger there? So, and remember that this Shire, this Eden of a place, is not by then affected yet by this danger. So it's not only that he's actually risking his life to save the world because it's not because he's seen what is the danger there, but he actually takes it from the stories that were told to him, and yet he has to take action. So in a way, it's even a grander sacrifice, because essentially, you know, unfortunately, but that's the nature of us. Unfortunately, it just seems that it's much easier for us to change when the pain of not changing becomes unbearable, right? So that's, for example, you have the first movers, sort of people that will adopt a certain new way of living, new technology or whatever, out of their openness, curiosity, and stuff like that. But then you also have that group of people that will have to get so low in terms of the suffering that they will have to experience before they are willing to change, that they're sort of missing the boat. Of course, you know, change will happen to all anyway. It's just a matter of at which point are you willing to take action and of course potentially get out on top rather than be trampled by the progress or the change in the world. So in terms of Tolkien's story, the trilogy at least, the danger lies in the all-seeing eye of Sauron, and Sauron is our main sort of antagonist. He or it is a sort of the Dark Lord, you could say, the opposite of good God or of Christ, Satan, you could potentially say. Certainly the way Mordor, his kingdom is portrayed is one that is, very similar to the divine comedies by Dante and Inferno within it. So it's basically a barren wasteland where the low dwellers, the evil eye, stay. And so it's an all-seeing eye. Sauron as a symbol of totalitarianism, basically. And of course, it makes sense that Tolkien wrote about the dangers of totalitarianism, because not only did he observe how the world went through totalitarian states around the globe during the Second World War and on the back end of it, but also he saw the dangers similarly to Aldous Huxley and similarly to George Orwell. He saw dangers and potential signs of trouble that all-seeing, sort of Big Brother overview of the world, of the society, of the individual might cause. It's like this oppressive surveillance state, a control of totalitarian state, right? Quite frankly, unfortunately, by now this is the 4th episode of the series of the season where I'm exploring fiction books through the lens of reality. And the one thing that I keep coming back to again and again, and maybe not in a worrisome manner, but certainly with attention to what is going on in the world, I think in many ways we are already there around the world in certain places, and unfortunately in some of those places being much closer to us that we would want to think they are. Surveillance became basically ubiquitous, right? Your laptop, your phone can be used at any time to spy on you. There are so many cameras, and in some states more than others, but there are so many cameras everywhere, there are so many lenses everywhere that this idea, this totalitarian state of Gulag Archipelago or Brave New World or 1984, this idea of Sauron's state is essentially, I think, a part of our life by now anyway. And one unique thing that I'm observing in the world in general is that even if the state itself is not actually totalitarian in its approach, it's because of these all-seeing eyes of everyone and the risks that come with people being able to access all the information all of the time, and in basically small bursts that it's much more easily digestible, but it's also much more fast foody. We become our own invigilators, and we can literally lynch one another online, which happens all of the time. We've already talked about the cancel culture, which essentially, I would argue, is a totalitarian approach. Sentence is made not by the state, rather by a state of mind of certain individuals, and a wave of hatred and potentially some online bots as well. Anyway, taking all that out and focusing on the story at hand, Sauron's gaze is basically this force to seek to dominate and eradicate like individuality, and basically to monitor or suppress, and both. And the interesting thing here is that there is also this idea that there are moments in the story, as you will explore, where Frodo feels like suffers from being seen, right? When the seeing eye gazes at him, it's this gaze of the utmost danger, right? Of death, essentially. And it creates this fear and paranoia, which essentially is, I think, what being seen in a wrong way by the world through the lens of the internet or through the lens of portrayal of media or anything is what we're fearing the most. One of the greatest fears that is universal for humanity is the fear of being outcasted, right? Being an outcast and not being able to belong, and it makes sense because especially in the older times, when we were reliant on our immediate tribe and when the world was much more dangerous on the daily basis to the average dweller than it is right now, being casted out of your immediate society, of your family, of your tribe, meant almost always certain death, simply because there were so many predators that would be able to take care of you when you're not within the tribe, and of course other tribes that were not really happy to openly take in leftovers from another tribe. And so this threat of being seen, this threat of being casted out, of being considered not good enough, or not be a part of the society is something that I think all of us has to challenge ourselves with every now and then. So, this is not to say, this is not to scare you to be more paranoid than you need to be. I don't think there is much utility in being paranoid, period. I think there is also no utility in pretending that there are no problems and that you will always be safe and everyone loves everyone. I think the middle way is probably the right approach, right? So being able to discern at which point should my fear be considered an alarm bell that allows me to flee, fight, or freeze, versus when the fear is, non-existent, or is basically fake and it's only imposed by some emotionality that we have within us. I think that's the challenge that all of us faces at all time. And of course, the antidote to this idea of the all-seeing eye and the totalitarian state is, of course, solidarity, courage, and truth, right? Because as we've explored in Gulag Archipelago, and as we've explored in many other stories, both within the podcast and just by probably living your life on the daily basis, there is this idea that the truth shall set you free. It is very difficult to run a dictatorship, a totalitarian state where true truth is available. That's why free speech is under such attack, if you think about it, and we've explored it last week and we'll do again next week as we do Brave New World Revisited book. The free speech, the free thought and free speech, free discourse is stands on the guard of our liberty, essentially. I mean, for the dictatorship, for the totalitarian state, unless free speech becomes curbed or censored, there is always an avenue for it to fall apart. It's only when people can no longer think for themselves and speak their mind that the powers that be, the state potentially, becomes an all-seeing eye that is basically able to do as they please without any consequence. So, the interesting quote here that I wanted to share with you and talk a little bit more about this idea of totalitarian state reliance on multiple actors and basically surveillance of one another is this quote from Gandalf that says, "There is more than one power at work, Frodo. The ring was not made by Sauron alone, nor can it be wholly governed by him." So the idea that we've explored in Gulag Archipelago is that a totalitarian state, especially an efficient one, depends on people's ability to spy on one another. And of course, the incentive in the Soviet Union, for example, was to spy on your neighbors, even spy on your family. And of course, there were rewards for those that did. And essentially that meant that at all times everyone was spying on everyone else. And so in that way, organically, the state was able to curb people's ability to think freely and to talk freely. Because unless I am able to express my free thoughts, free speech with another without the risk of being snatched and kidnapped the next morning, I won't be able to raise any sort of uprising, any sort of independent party, any sort of solidarity. And that is why, if you think about it, which is also a troublesome theme that I'm seeing play out in our world on the daily basis, that is why I think there is such an attack on the units such as the family unit or the local community unit. If you think about it, if you live in a bigger city, for example, such as myself, I live in a city with more people than a little town, and yet I know less people closely and I have less trust for people than I would if I lived in a small community somewhere in the outskirts. We've basically, through the appealing proposition of individuality and of consumption, of production, of efficiency, this idea of a man being like a machine, we've allowed ourselves in many ways to become more and more disconnected from others, and therefore ultimately more and more liable for being manipulated and taken control, taken advantage over, taken advantage of by the totalitarian state of all kinds. So this is a worrisome idea if you think about it, but there is this sentence, I think, in the Bible that a house divided cannot stand, and that's exactly it. The moment you can no longer rely on your immediate surroundings, on your neighbors, on your immediate family, the moment you are basically alone, you're much less dangerous to someone trying to cause you harm than if you are united and if you stand in solidarity and trust. And this trust is essentially what the totalitarian state wants to erode at first possible moment, So, of course, the all-seeing eye, as you will explore in the book, has more to it. There is more to it than the eye can see. Of course, the parallels are endless. I don't think Tolkien thought about it when he wrote, but the parallel to the idea of data privacy, basically, and the state's ability to surveil on us on the daily basis, and all the corporations being able to access our data at any time. These might have only been concepts at the time. Now they are a reality, and now we don't even fight back that much. So I'll let you ponder this, and as we talk about next books in the coming weeks, I think this totalitarian state risk will come back and come again, because unfortunately it is one of those risks that seems to always lurk behind the corner for civilization. Now, the third theme is this cliche of a theme that all big things have small beginnings. This quote, not from the book, and I do not know who was the original author of the book. This quote really resonates with me because, if you think about it, that's basically the story of everything you do in life. You had to start learning the language that you hear right now, me speaking, by learning little vowels and little sounds, potentially. You had to basically become, if you are a muscly sports person, you know how much effort it took, unless you took some shortcuts and spiked yourself with some things. You know how much how many steps and small steps to begin with it took before you were as strong and powerful as you are right now. And this yet again, this echo of the Christian invitation to pick up your cross and bear it comes to mind here, with Frodo being this humble ring bearer, this ordinary character, insignificant essentially to the world, and yet able to ripple out a world's change for the better. And I think this is a very universal and very optimistic, inspiring, empowering, and hopeful view of our each and everyone's ability. Anything you want to do in life, and I'm saying this being 28, and I don't really think I have that much authority other than the things I've done, so I'll only keep to those for the time being. But everything I have achieved in life that I find meaningful, because not all the things I've achieved I find meaningful, mind you, all of these things that I do find meaningful came to me through diligent effort, persistence, and humble beginnings, and humility, sort of a beginner's mindset, as we've explored before. This idea that you need to take the first step, and you will struggle, you will fall, you will make mistakes, you will make a fool out of yourself, and the only way to healthily go and become a master of something is to just practice, do, and potentially, if you can, of course, learn from others that do it better. And we have opportunities as such at all times. And I know it's in many ways imperfect, but the way this podcast have established itself, and just the mere fabric of it all, the fact that I have the tiny humble studio I have right now in comparison to how I started, is still a long way. And of course, it's not it wouldn't be possible unless I had endless resources and I was some sort of a genius in all the aspects of creating a podcast, which, mind you, there are plenty, and in many of them I am still close to a complete fool. In many aspects of these things, I had to make mistakes and make adjustments, and slowly but surely find out what works, find out what doesn't, and the most important thing, just keep going. This I think I've already mentioned to you before, but something that really hit me when I was listening to Joe Rogan's podcast, and at some point they were discussing the interesting fact that the majority of podcasts on Spotify apparently don't have more than 11 episodes. I don't know why 11. And they were basically discussing this idea that, unfortunately, majority of us, for other reasons, some people simply don't do it truthfully. So since it's not truly yours, over time your motivation disappears. Some people expect a quick, instant gratification, and when they don't feel it, they give up. And some people, decided to give up for other reasons. But if you realize that for all of those that did make it, for all of those that did achieve success, there is a huge, improportional amount of people that didn't. And unfortunately, when we learn from history, unless you delve deeply into historians and sources that offer you broader scope of history than that written by the victors, you don't see the true light, right? Through the majority of history, there were a few individuals far and in between that we read about in contemporary media, and then there were thousands upon thousands of people that lived ordinary lives without ever making it to the pages of those history books. And for good reason. I mean, if you think about it, the majority wouldn't even be literate at the time, so why would they even be a part of a book that they don't understand? The point I'm trying to make here is it's not about being ordinary or not ordinary, rather it's through those little steps and consecutive actions and basically picking up your cross and burying it, challenging yourself and becoming a better person and better at whatever you want to do, whatever that means to you. Like there is, whatever, literally, you will over time become powerful. And this is the story of Frodo. Frodo is an ordinary guy who's put in a position, he's offered a choice basically seemingly with no alternative, and of course alternative would be to just curl up and die, but it wouldn't make for a good story. And his small steps and small efforts day by day create the amazing story that you get to experience and create an amazing story of his life. And that's essentially all of us all the time. I have no doubt that where you are right now in your life is much better, whatever that means to you. In your definition of better, it is better than it was before. And if it isn't, then that just means that you either absolved yourself from responsibility and tried to sweep it under the rug, whatever you were challenging yourself with, or you've just been following the wrong path. And that's also a lesson to be learned, right? Let me be right back. I'll just grab the charger. And we're back. So, the quote here, before we move on to the next theme, is that even the smallest person can change the course of future. And of course, the second one is, such is oft the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere. Now, I would like to share with you the most meaningful, to me personally, theme from the book. And it actually comes out of a little poem that is featured in the book. The poem goes, "All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost." And of course, even in this poem, you have at least 4 major themes we can explore, which we will not. I'll refrain and I'll give you the chance to ponder them yourself. But this idea of not all those who wander are lost is something that truly have resonated with me deeply over my own life's journey. If you think about it, all the things that we strive to do come from some ideas, right? Some ideas are given to us by others, while others are sort of churned out ideas of our own based off of what we've explored and experienced in the world. And something that I think we're not courageous enough to think often is what we want to do and what rings true to us. And it can be really difficult, If you're listening to this and you're younger than me, then that means you grew up in a society where not only your parents, your immediate family, your peers and teachers and community and society and TV and billboards, but also internet, phone screens, advertisements everywhere and about anything are constantly screaming to basically impose a certain way of being onto you. There are some expectations you might have been given by your parents on the way you should be. There are some expectations the society has of you. Some of these might be explicit, while others might be sort of more implicit, sometimes insidious, but sort of suggested in many ways. And I think, especially at a younger age, when we're very, very suggestible and not really yet knowing who we are, and it's interesting, right? This is an interesting conundrum, that if I were to ask you, who are you? I'm fairly certain that you will be answering from different perspectives. One person might say to that question their name, another person might claim their vocation, another might say something about their hobby, and yet another one might point to their race or nationality, or where they come from. So it's not obvious to us what does that mean to be someone. And if you think about the idea that we are a spiritual being, each of us is a spiritual being having a human experience, then at least this question should invite us to consider, what does that mean for us to be something? And my earlier point is that in many ways we define ourselves by what others have defined ourselves to be. If your parents wanted you to be a doctor and you have become a doctor, you might even be a happy doctor, but that does not necessarily mean that that's who you wanted to be, right? And this invitation of considering that not all those who wander are lost truly resonates with me, because if you're like me, you've probably already, and remember, I'm not even 30 yet, you've probably already had tens of different jobs, some of which you were really good at, some of which you were really bad at. I had jobs which gave me pleasure and fulfillment for the time being. I had jobs that I favored, and I had jobs that I hated. I had jobs that I was really bad at, like latte art, which truly frustrated me. And I had jobs that felt really fulfilling and I enjoyed and I was quite good at. I bet it's the same for all of us. You have some things that you're predisposed to be good at. You have some things that you've given a lot of effort in, and so with these all big things have small beginnings. With these small steps, you have become the great in it. And the reminder here, I guess, is to be open to this growth mindset, to be open to this self-discovery and to finding one's purpose, and to celebrate the exploration, to be open to be wrong and to be open to make mistakes. There is this idea of growth mindset being that apparently people who consider themselves to be constantly learning and progressing and that believe they can change are more likely to succeed than those who consider themselves to be fixed and not being able to change. And so by definition, I think, those who believe to be able to change make more effort to change, and therefore they do, while the others, as they believe they will not change, they don't make as much effort, or maybe not at all, and therefore they do not change. That's a mouthful for you. But this idea that, to become good at something, you first need to be really bad at it, right? It's very unlikely that you will just start playing the guitar, you'll strum it once, and you're the greatest, right? It's unlikely that your first episode of the podcast will be your best one. It's unlikely that the first time you speak out in public, or you do jujitsu, or you decide to learn a new language, you will be fluent and the best. It's simply that doesn't work that way. And so we have to be open to try and fail and to learn and to grow within that path. Now, something that I often think about when this quote comes into my mind is this idea I've explored by discussing with a fellow traveler. I was once, and I think it was in Dublin or Porto, and I was talking with someone in the hostel, and we were discussing what's the best way of experiencing a city or a different new place where you're exploring. And we agreed that it's not, this is not to say that you should not use local guides or whatever, but it's often, at least for me and for that person, it doesn't actually ring true to be following a guide or an online forum that tells you where to go, where the most touristic attractions are. Rather, to get the feel of the city or to get the feel of the place, there is a certain need to get lost in it, right? To wander around without much goal. Maybe the goal should be just to wander, and then inevitably you either encounter some local people that you end up interacting with, and you get to learn their story, and that's a beautiful and a really visceral experience. Or by exploring the unexplored, the unpopular, you find some unique spaces, and in a way it's a very different experience of, for example, Greece. If you go to Greece to lie down in an all-inclusive hotel for 5 days, or if you go camping in Greece around the different areas. Even more so if you go backpacking, and so then you're basically constantly on the move and sleeping in some hostels or in some, spaces where you can find a place to rest. So in a similar way, I think this finding the path less traveled, right? Like Robert Frost's popular poem, he writes that I chose the path less traveled and it made all the difference. Is this idea that if you go down the well-worn path, on one hand, of course, the comfort is there because you kind of can anticipate what you're going to find. But on the other, it's unlikely that you will find anything out of the ordinary or anything yours, right? You will find more of the same. And if you want to be more of the same, then fair enough. But if you do want to be your own self, and if you want to find some unique aspects of yourself or the place, then inevitably you should pursue the path less traveled. And on this topic I actually made an episode of the same title called the Not All Those Who Wander Are Lost, which I'll link below. But on this topic, the one thing that I wanted to share from the book's perspective is that, as you will see, there are many characters in the book, and all of them have very different journeys to make. Of course, it's a trilogy, so there is plenty of space for Tolkien to describe the different stories. And I guess the point here is that there is no single right way of living. Your life will be yours, and so it will be your right way, right? Of course, there are probably some indicators that you're going in the wrong direction, and potentially one of those indicators would be that your life is becoming worse than it was before, and that's definitely a red flag to look out for. But if you are like the most people, then, and if you've been trying diligently, even just by a little step every other day or each day, you are likely to be right now in a better position, whatever that means to you, than when you were before. And if that's the case, then you are going in the right direction. It's just your right direction. And, not knowing what you want to do, I think, is very universal. Not knowing what the future holds is basically essential. And as Steve Jobs, said in his famous speech, he could not connect the dots looking forward. He could only connect them looking back. Of course, it's a reference to these numbered dots that you match with a pen to make a shape of a sort. So, this idea that you don't know what's going to happen, the future is uncertain, and the only certain thing about the future is that it's uncertain, and the past is in the past, it's dead, it's kind of irrelevant. The past can can teach us something, but not necessarily. As Mark Twain said, history does not repeat, it rhymes. So there are certain themes that seem to come over and over again, but for the most part, you simply don't know what the future holds. So you're essentially constantly in this uncertain territory, but you can over time look back and see what worked simply through the path. And of course, it's so easy for us to look back at history and be like, of course that's how it happened, of course the Allies would win the Second World War, of course Hitler would lose, whatever. But it's not obvious, right? In the time being, you have to remember, at the time, no one knew what's going to happen. Everything was up in the air. And it's very similar to your life every day. So, it is why we need faith, I think, in the things we do. For example, coming back to the podcast idea, apparently the majority of podcasts on Spotify don't have more than 11 episodes. I don't know why 11, but apparently, for whatever reason, maybe people don't continue after that amount of episodes because it's not true for them. Maybe they don't continue because they run out of material. Maybe they don't continue because they didn't see the instant gratification that they're used to through social media, and so they quit. For whatever reason, the point is, because we persist with a certain level of faith, we are giving ourselves a chance to succeed, whatever that means. Unless you persist in learning a new language or a new skill, you're unlikely to become a master of that language or that skill. Unless you persist in, developing, progressing, creating your reality to be better than it was yesterday, you're unlikely to have better results than you had yesterday. And so, on one hand, you should embrace the uncertainty and the growth mindset and basically allow yourself to go your own path. And sometimes that means also going against what other people expect of you. And at the same time, once you get a hold of some things that are meaningful for you, I would urge you to fight for them and be persistent, to not quit, to just keep going in silent determination and in faith. Because as you will explore in the book, that's exactly what many of the characters have to do. They don't know what's going to happen. They're just doing the best they can in their circumstance. And this is actually a good segue to our final theme, which is the idea of doing what to do, deciding what to do with the time that we're given. As you can remember, the quote that we've started with is, "It is not for us to decide when we will be born, but we must decide what to do with the time we have been given." And so, you have the agency in facing life circumstances. You do not have agency in choosing those circumstances, especially the ones you were dealt with from the beginning. Where you were born, you did not choose. Who you were born into, what family, you did not choose that. You did not choose when you were born, you did not choose majority of your early life choices as well. It's only since you've sort of maybe became a young adolescent and then going forward, that you started to have agency in facing life circumstances. But the thing is, you have that agency and you can take advantage of it, or you can curl up and pretend that you cannot do anything about it, and therefore you will have to accept the misery of your circumstance, whatever that circumstance might be. So they often say it's like playing the cards, life cards that you're dealt. And I think one of the most empowering, in a way, morbidly optimistic idea is that from Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which I'll link below as well. This idea that by pondering your inevitable death, you're much more likely to get motivated to do something today, to not postpone it till tomorrow, because tomorrow might never come. And it feels that, when you go day by day, it might feel like you're in a rut. You might feel a bit stuck. You might feel like it doesn't make sense what you're doing. Whatever it feels like, you always have the agency to choose how you face these circumstances and how you approach them, with what attitude. And essentially, even if you cannot know the outcome of your actions, you can strive for a certain goal, and so at least make it more likely to become a reality. If you want to learn how to play the guitar, but you never pick up the instrument, it's unlikely that you will ever learn to play it. If you pick it up, of course, there is always the risk that, you will die tomorrow, and so you will never master the instrument, but at least you are stepping in the right direction. And there is something to be said about this quality that we have as humans, that actually, I think Tony Robbins said that progress equals happiness. I would add that meaningful progress equals happiness, meaningful to ourselves. Whatever you find meaningful, whatever you believe to be right to do in the certain moment, or whatever you believe to be meaningful to strive for, when you see you're going from A to B and you're covering some ground, and you look back and you see the progress you've made, again and again, you reinforce this idea that you're going in the right direction, and that is very, very motivating. So instead of, screaming at the world and being upset about your situation, you have always the chance to simply change it, to make it better. And unfortunately, many of us, we have the tendency to fall prey to comfort and to seek comfort over growth. And I think that's a bottomless misery pit, because over time, apparently, people regret most things they've not tried, not the things they've tried and failed. And so if you seek comfort overly, you might just find that you wasted your life away waiting for the great opportunity, or simply thinking like you cannot do it. And, there is this Confucius quote we've shared again and again on the podcast, that he who says he can and he who says he can't are both usually right, because one will obviously take action and the other won't. So, as Gandalf said, all we have to do is decide what to do with the time that is given us. And what you decide to do with that time is yours. It's a wake-up call of a sort. And of course, when I read and watched the movie and read the book as a young child, an adult, youngster, adolescent, it didn't ring as true for me at the time. I mostly focused on the battles and the heroes. But it might just be the most heroic thing you can do with your life, is to decide again and again every day that you are in charge, and that you will do what you can to make your life, the life of those around you, and the world a better place. And I think that's a meaningful goal in and of itself, to become the hero of your own story, truly. And instead of trying to choose a different story, which you cannot, to play the cards you're dealt to your best ability. And I think that is very, very empowering, to act purposefully, right? To become your own hero, to tell a good story. I think that's a good invitation, to tell a good story. To be able to say at the end of majority of days that if you were to choose to live it again, you would choose similarly. That's what I usually wish to my friends and family when I call them for their birthday. To have the satisfaction of a life well lived. To enjoy the passage of time, because that's essentially what life is. It's the passage of time. So yeah, I guess the final thoughts I wanted to leave you with is that the three themes that I think ring the most true throughout the trilogy is heroism, humility, and truth. That truth will set us free, that truth will prevail, and therefore by becoming true to yourself and by acting out your and the world's truth, you can make the better place. You can make the world a better place. Heroism, and basically this idea of sacrificing yourself. There is a phrase that if you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for everything. Or if you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for anything. Something like that. And I think there is a big power in basically, once you recognize what is meaningful to you, what makes sense to you, do all you can to empower that, to make that worth your while, and to make the world a better place through it. And of course, humility, humility of humble beginnings, humility of the growth mindset, humility of accepting that you are imperfect and you are going to make mistakes. And humility to recognize that you don't know everything right now. You will probably never know everything. And so you might as well start. If there is something you want to do, just do it. If there is something you want to try, just try it. And if there is someone somewhere doing something that you want to do, you can always ask for help. I think that's a big power. And there is a big powerful theme in being humble. So yeah, yet again, I would definitely urge you to read the books, listen to them. They are amazing. As I said, I didn't want to spill too many details. I hope I didn't. But it's an amazing, amazing story. And the movie, of course, the trilogy is also wonderful. But I would urge you to, if you haven't yet, then start with the book first. The book always offers more details, and then the movie can sort of allow you to enjoy the entertainment of those amazing stories. And my invitation for you this week is to choose one of these themes and to really reflect on them. As we've talked today for, I think, somewhere around an hour, there were some things that came up to you in your mind. There were some themes that felt more resonant, more true, and there were some that didn't. And I would invite you to be true to yourself, to find what is true for you and to respond to that, to think about it, and to maybe make some changes in your life for the better because of it. It's the least I can hope for. To have entertained your potential for growth and to therefore make the world a better place through that. So yeah. Other than that, as always, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.